Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FinDev Gateway webinar, Building Climate Resilience, What Can FSPs Do? My name is Abby Augusta. I'm an editor for FinDev Gateway, and I'm joined by my colleague, Daniel Contreras, who is supporting us on the technical side for this Zoom webinar. He's available in the chat if you have any audio or connection issues that he could help with. Our series of FinDev webinars allow financial inclusion practitioners like you to share lessons and attend online presentations and discussions delivered by the world's leading financial inclusion experts. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a couple of notes on logistics. We have a special treat in this webinar. We have interpretation available into Spanish, so just in Spanish. En español, tenemos para este webinar interpretación al español. Para acceder al español puede buscar el icono del globo que debería estar en el panel de control abajo y seleccionar el canal para español, para Spanish. And just to continue with some more logistics, attendee microphones will all be muted automatically. So in order to ask questions during the webinar, please use the chat box, which should be on your right-hand side of the Zoom window. And we invite you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar, and we will address them in the Q&A session at the end. To make sure your question is seen by the moderator, make sure to select everyone from the drop-down menu when you send in your question. We also ask you to please keep your webcam off during the webinar. And finally, the webinar recording and presentation will be available on the FinDev Gateway website after we finish the webinar, and we will email it to all people who have registered for the webinar. And with that, now I will hand things over to Calum Scott from Opportunity International to introduce today's webinar and our speakers.
That's great. Thank you, Abby, and welcome to all of you who've joined the webinar today. We're going to have what I hope is an interesting and I'm going to say action-provoking discussion. So I'm going to be ambitious and say action-provoking, not thought-provoking. Discussion on financial inclusion and climate change, and particularly the role that financial service providers can play in building climate resilience. So I'm going to start by explaining the agenda and introducing each of our speakers from our expert panel. I'll then make a few opening remarks before handing over to the speakers. After the presentations, we will have a short Q&A session, and I'll then open it up for questions from the audience. So please do submit your questions in the chat box as we go along. And if you'd like to, you could also state who your question is intended for and what organization you're representing. So firstly, we'll hear from Wendy Chamberlin. Wendy's a consultant working with CGAP on the topic of climate resilience. She was Global Program Director for the BOMA project. That's a poverty graduation program based in Kenya. And prior to that, she spent 12 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she was working on developing, delivering solutions to drive financial inclusion for ultra-poor communities in emerging markets. So Wendy's going to talk to us about what CGAP hopes to achieve from promoting climate resilience through financial inclusion, in particular, focusing on gendered aspects of vulnerability, climate impact, and resilience strategies. After that, we'll hear from Sophia Watkins, my colleague from Opportunity International. Sophia is helping Opportunity establish a network climate strategy while working with our ag finance team to develop scalable programs, including financial products that we hope will build climate resilience among our smallholder farmer clients. So Sophia will talk about Opportunity International's farmer support agent model and how that works with financial service providers in Africa to build climate resilience of farmers through regenerative agriculture. We'll then hear from two very experienced leaders of microfinance institutions on their work in the climate resilience space. They're going to share with us their experiences and successes in the field. And I think we'll also hear a bit about the challenges and limitations they see for the microfinance model in supporting climate resilience. So firstly, we'll hear from Kartik Mehta. Kartik is the co-founder and managing director of the Indian MFI Pahal Financial Services. Kartik has over 30 years of experience in the banking and financial services industry in India, and he's worked across corporate finance, treasury management, retail banking distribution, agriculture credit, and priority sector microfinance. And last but not least, we'll hear from Pedro Marchetti, co-founder and board member of Financiera FDL, a Nicaraguan MFI with a strong on 2010 to 2021, and microfinance's current focus is on ecosystem-based mitigation, and he's a member of the European microfinance platforms Green Inclusive and Climate Smart Finance Action Group. And lastly, just to introduce myself, I'm Calum Scott. I'm the Global Impact Director for Opportunity International. I've been with Opportunity for 14 years. I have a background in economics and public policy. I'm excited about this topic because I feel there is great potential for the financial inclusion sector to support climate resilience. Perhaps like many of you in the audience, I'm no climate expert. I've been with the Microfinance Network Opportunity International for about 14 years. So I know financial inclusion. My professional interest in climate change dates back just 3 years. And the reason I started to take an interest in the topic was I could see the possibility of different pieces of a puzzle coming together to help clients manage the impacts of climate change. I won't talk anymore because I think the presenters that you're going to hear from are best placed to shine a light on some of those pieces of the puzzle, the challenges in putting those together, and the next steps that hopefully we in the audience, and I'm including myself in that, can take in terms of building climate resilience through financial inclusion. So I'll hand over now to Wendy, and just a reminder again, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so please do post questions in the chat as we go along. So over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Calum. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the chance to be here as well. So as Calum said, my name is Wendy Chamberlin, and I'm a consultant with CGAP and have been working with CGAP since last year, looking first at the topic of resilience. CGAP is a think tank, as many of you may know, housed within the World Bank, and it's focused on the topic of financial inclusion. And last year, we began a research journey to think about moving away from financial inclusion as an outcome, but rather looking at resilience as an outcome. And what is even a word that is sometimes overused and gets watered down a lot even mean in the context of financial inclusion, and what does it mean for people's lives to be resilient? We began to really focus on the fact that resilience is comprised of a number of factors that extend beyond financial services, but that formal and informal financial services definitely play a significant role in. And that led us down a path of thinking about this topic from a systemic lens, of paying attention to what's happening at the individual and household level, at the market level, and at the state level and international level, and also looking at this from a multi-sectoral lens. Fast forward a few months, and we started to look specifically at climate resilience and what it means for people who face climate risks, which are especially the populations that we focus on, those who are the most vulnerable. And what is the role that financial services can play in helping people to reduce the impact of and adapt to climatic risks? We are embarking on a 4-year project right now that is really focused on ultimately hoping to increase and influence the effectiveness of financial services in being responsive to the needs of vulnerable populations, especially for women. And our hope is out of this journey that we'll be able to offer guidance to financial sector stakeholders and our counterparts in the financial inclusion community about how financial services need to be able to respond to the real needs of people who face these risks on a day-to-day basis. If you go to the next slide. So I mentioned we're doing a 4-year journey. This first year is really about CGAP's own learning. We're a little late to the game on this conversation, and we recognize that, and we have a lot to learn. And so we're doing that through a few channels this year. We are embarking on some demand side research to first just listen to customers about what their experience is in dealing with climate shocks and stresses, and how they respond. We're doing some supply side research to understand the needs of financial service providers and other sectoral stakeholders. We're doing some work that will also look at the opportunity for response that could be realized through government safety net programs, if at all. And then we're talking again to our stakeholders in the financial inclusion sector and also in the donor community as well. Next slide, please. So as Calum mentioned, one aspect of our work that we are prioritizing is specifically looking at how women are impacted by climate shocks and stresses. Essentially what we are seeing and what we hypothesize, and maybe many of you can chime in with more evidence and data as well, we know already that women face distinct risks and distinct barriers, or I should say they're exposed to risks in a different way, and they face distinct barriers, especially as it relates to gaining access to financial services. We want to understand what is the experience of vulnerable women as they are responding to shocks and stresses. Does their risk exposure increase? What happens to them because of existing social norms that are in place, and how does that impact their ability to navigate these risks? And then what are the resilience strategies that they employ in order to respond? And for us, this goes to kind of a point that I think is really important for this whole conversation. As we think about taking on this topic and responding to this topic from a financial inclusion lens, we're really trying to challenge ourselves not to address it with what's the right product to fit the situation, but first rather to understand what are the different experiences that people have in anticipation of while they cope with and as they recover and adapt to a world where they are faced with ongoing climate threats. And if so, what does that mean for the coping strategies that they employ? And how do we then think about the role that financial services can play in supporting their coping strategies? So looking forward to this conversation and also hearing from our colleagues who are working in the financial sector about how they're responding. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. That's great. We're really grateful for CGAP hosting this webinar. And I'm sure that presentation will prompt questions from the audience, especially around the role of financial service providers. But we'll move straight on to Sophia. So Sophia, over to you.
Thanks, Calum. So as mentioned, my role at Opportunity International is working at the nexus of our climate strategy and our expertise in financial inclusion, particularly with our agriculture finance team. So I will have an agriculture tilt in my presentation. Right, so starting with climate, we're on track to hit 2.7 degrees Celsius by 2100, which is a number that's a little bit hard to conceptualize. So instead, I chose to use IPCC's projections. Even I trip up on these acronyms. They're projections of additional days above 35 degrees Celsius. It's a very kind of visceral. I think most of us in this room have had to sustain a work day in 35 degrees, and it is not easy. But I chose this graphic really for 3 reasons. First, it's among the most robust and consistent projections across the 30+ models that's employed by IPCC. Here we see a compilation of 25 models. The region in dark red represents 40 or more days per year above 35 degrees. So that's well over a month additional heat. So the second reason I chose this graphic is that recent heat waves are a really powerful reminder that the effects of climate change aren't a thing of the future and are having very real consequences today. High temperatures can lead to crop failure and reduced harvest quality, especially for grains and vegetables and other rain-fed crops. This year's wheat crop in India, for example, because of the massive heat wave, is projected to be 7 to 8% lower But perennial crops and tree crops can also be affected. Our financial institution partners in Ghana, for example, recorded 30% declines in their cocoa harvests, which for any market is devastating. And especially for a country where it is such a major crop and a major export. And finally, and most importantly, temperatures are also crippling for human productivity. And if sustained, can lead to severe health consequences, even death. And I think that can't be emphasized enough. And the final reason I chose this graph or this image is that it is an example of the longer term and recurrent effects of climate change that are arguably more effective at eroding wealth and resilience than kind of these one-time large natural disasters. And it is climate change's repetitive burden on limited health, financial, and governance systems that put poor people in poor countries at the most risk. So because of all this, we believe that this demands a focus on building resilience and climate change adaptation, because these are the systems that need resilience. Right. So good slide change, actually. It's crucial to understand the challenges facing these systems in order to help build this long-term resilience. In this slide, I tried to map out some of the challenges our team encounters daily across our network of financial institutions and rural clients. We currently work with 7 financial service providers across 5 countries. And our work is really based on listening to be able to understand needs, because with that, you can effectively build resilience. We look at both the demand and supply side of the financial ecosystem. And again, we really look at the financial ecosystem, not just kind of one dimension of the process. Climate change does pose additional burdens, which are in the bar at the bottom, but also some opportunities in the funding space. So the challenge now really lies in making these new channels of funding and investment reach the populations that they're intended to serve. And that's not going to be a small challenge. And I think this is really where FSPs can play a big role. The next slide more concretely outlines our team's work in this space. Again, the agriculture finance team, specifically with rural agricultural clients, but also within the agricultural supply chains in rural economies. I've put in bold the areas that our work is being most influenced by new challenges posed by climate change, and again, also funding opportunities. And climate change really is influencing needs across agricultural supply chains and also within agricultural supply chains. So many actors are being affected and coming into are part of our consideration of how to cope with climate change adaptation and risk management as well. Our financial support agent network, with which Calum mentioned in the introductions, is allowing us to not only provide longer term support to households, but also collect the data that we need to deliver financial products that are tailored to their needs and to local contexts, and try to get them subsidized in some capacity to be able to promote adoption of climate adaptation practices, primarily regenerative agriculture, income diversification, and things like that. And of course, this varies quite dramatically across regions based on different supply chains and different customer needs. But it really does, this we call it the FSA network, Farmer Support Agent Network, really gives us this high touch and also scalable ability. It is largely digitized, and farmers will be visited twice, if not more times a year during key harvest times. So it really does give us really good data. Fundamental to our approach is addressing the financial institution partners' needs and building the capacity for them to expand into more rural and low-income communities. We're currently developing strategies to also fill the financing gap for climate change adaptation by leveraging climate funding to crowd in impact capital. I know that gets a little wordy, but it's just essentially blended finance. And just, again, there's a huge gap in financing of adaptation. And one of the ways, which you can see on the bottom right, collateral easement, one of the biggest barriers for smallholder farmers to access capital is collateral requirements and also high interest rates. So this strategy in particular looks at how can we actually reduce their collateral demands as an incentive to adopt regenerative agriculture practices. And with my last 30 seconds, I'll take a first stab at answering the question that we're posing today about what should financial service providers, or what can they do to help build financial resilience. And we really believe that it's in the networks and the reach of financial service providers that can be instrumental in providing last mile support and just able to reach the world's most vulnerable populations. However, if this is to be the case, we still need to reach over 1/6 of the global population that remains without access to financial services, primarily in poor countries and predominantly women. So in short, I think the biggest first step is to identify the barriers to expanding client networks and to seek support to overcome them. I'll throw it back to Calum.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks for that overview of impacts, as well as your work through the Farmer Service Agent Network with multiple financial service providers. We're now going to focus down on how individual microfinance institutions have worked on building climate resilience and their experience with that. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Kartik, to talk about Pahal's experience.
Thank you so much, Calum and Sophia, for setting up the context. We are a microfinance institution based out of India, based in the western part of India, which is in the state of Gujarat and Ahmedabad. Can you just move the next slide, please? It's portfolio of over $130 million with over 200 branches across 8 geographies in central, western, northern India. Having served over 1 million customers till date in terms of women borrowers since inception. 2 very important aspects which the earlier speakers mentioned, women and rural semi-urban agriculture. So both these are right up there in terms of our critical stakeholders. And that's how we decided to kind of embrace the challenge of, being an intermediary as financial services intermediary and supporting them in whatever ways we can, which we'll kind of talk about it in subsequent slides. Can just move to the next slide, please. Right. So as you can see, most of the geographies in which we operate are either highly vulnerable or moderately vulnerable in the context of climate change. And therefore, in a sense, we are already facing, our clients are already facing some impact, and therefore the need to build the resilience as of yesterday. What are the major drivers of this vulnerability? Again, in the Indian context, 80% of the Indian agriculture scenario consists of small and marginal farmers. Predominantly, India has rain-fed agriculture, and with limited insurance on the agriculture side, on the crop side, low density of road network, creating more complexities, and limited agroforestry and horticulture, resulting into extreme weather conditions. At different parts of the country have very different weather conditions at the same time. You have a drought in a part of India on one hand, and same time you'll have excessive flooding in some other part of the country, and with the kind of population going up the ladder in terms of their economic conditions, carbon emission is a challenge. Severe heat wave significantly impacts the agriculture harvest, and as Wendy and Sophia mentioned earlier, that we are already kind of seeing the impact of wheat, which is the cultivation and the production is down significantly this year. This is essentially due to the rapid degeneration of land and deterioration of the productive capacities. This kind of made us think, what is it that as financial service providers we can do? And if you can just go to the next slide, we can kind of at least understand, the intermediation work that one can do. I think in the context of India, as I mentioned earlier, small and marginal farmers are at the center stage of, bearing the brunt on the climate change, and therefore their livestock, if there is a death or a vulnerability of the cattle, it is very difficult for them to replace given the economic conditions. So that is actually a kind of very important element of allied agriculture activities in the Indian context, that if you maintain a good livestock, then there is lesser pressure on the land cultivation and excessive exploitation. I think the irrigation is again a very critical piece in the context of India. The delivery of the last mile delivery of water to the fields and the crops is given the smallness of the land holdings is extremely critical, and there are models that are available which can effectively provide financial intermediation for drip services. Some of the other aspects which we really kind of have to tackle are how do you promote agroforestry, and India has just come up recently with a very strong agroforestry policy, which needs to kind of get into execution. Migration is another big challenge of climate change, and some of the geographies where we operate in states like the eastern states of Bihar, where very nearly every monsoon, our customers have to kind of migrate on the main roads and survive because their houses are flooded. So this poses an enormous challenge. And while financial services is a critical component, I think it's very important that there is an ecosystem approach. And a little bit of that I would like to cover in my next slide. Can you just move on? Realizing the challenge of geographies in which we operate, in the western geography of Gujarat, which is a very strong livestock milk producing state, we kind of decided to offer funding not only for livestock, basically in terms of ensuring that in case a borrower wants to move, the farmer wants to move from excessive exploitation of land to livestock as an animal husbandry activity, how do we kind of enable them? So of course, cattle loans is one part of it, but insurance on cattle is probably something which is a big differentiator for them, because typically these small and marginal farmers find it extremely challenging to get another cattle should there be an event of death. It was a huge challenge for us to implement this in the initial phase of the project, pilot phase of the project, which is just got over because there were no takers on insurance for cattle, and it's not a very cheap insurance product. Having said that, I think it is extreme. What has happened is that the benefits of insurance, once they started getting it, there is a change in their mindset in terms of going for insurance. The potential outreach of small and marginal farmers in the context of India is 126 million households, 126 million farmers. So essentially, that is 80% of the farmer population of the country. Another project which we have been able to implement is partnership with the agri-tech company. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a very clear need to partner with other ecosystem players. While there is a lot that financial service providers can do on a standalone basis, they might not be as effective as they would in case if they forge interesting partnerships. And this is an attempt where we have partnered with the agri-tech company, which allows their customers to kind of obtain the right kind of input, seeds and fertilizers without impacting degeneration of their land resources through the right kind of education and the services that they provide. And the funding comes from Pahal's partnership with the agri-tech company, and this is again turning out to be a hugely successful product in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where we have initiated this pilot. the opportunity here clearly is that there are over 450 agri-tech companies in the country which are trying to empower these 150 million farmers with data-led systems, and therefore it can be a huge leg up for the entire climate change initiative. So these are some of the pilots which we have initiated. There is a lot that needs to be done in the space. There's a lot of support, as Wendy earlier mentioned in her conversations, between various ecosystem players that is required to make this kind of execution fulfillment. Thank you very much. Calum?
Thanks, Kartik. Thanks, Kartik. We're now going to move to the other side of the world, and we'll hear from Pedro about the work that he's been doing with FDL in Nicaragua. Over to you, Pedro.
Yes, just trying to get the slide up. Yep, here we go. Thank you to Opportunity International and CGAP to inviting FDL here. I hope you can see the presentation at this point. So let me just begin here with the idea that how the world is, and you see those big names, those big languages there. But as Kartik knows, there's a lot of small languages out there that we have to listen to, okay? So let me just show you that. Now, inclusive resilience, it really is the mecca of microfinance today. And what can we do? How do we showcase things like Kartik is doing to get to 126 million? How do we benchmark quality and not just size and outreach? I want to caution against what we like to call microfinance narcissism, right? That really, that's the view that microfinance and its institutions are in the center of everything. And especially, we know that credit is not a panacea. We know that insurance is not a panacea, although it's up on the agenda now. We know that, but nevertheless, second tier and third tier institutions continue to support standalone credit, not combining it with technical assistance or ecological services, payment for those, and without sufficient. So what I'm saying is we don't get out of microfinance narcissism, and I think that's a great task for CGAP. We won't get to inclusive resilience. Now,
hi Pedro. Sorry to interrupt. Can you just switch to the presentation view? I think that would just make the slide a bit larger.
It shipped out of it. Pardon me, it shifted out of it. I've got to get you out of here to do that. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see if I can get this up. There we go. Yeah.
That's great, thanks.
Okay, now can you see it? Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
That's right, great.
Okay, well, one thing, Pahal and FDL, we're not typical financial service providers, right? Microfinance industry is basically urban and we're rural. Microfinance is basically commerce and service. And we are presenting today what we do with agriculture production or housing production in our case. This is into financial services and standalone credit. And really, we're into non-financial services as a key: technical assistance, territorial multi-education for different sectors, incubation of microfinance people who are not able to receive credit at this point, leasing, water and energy alternatives. And finally, the microfinance industry is basically has an insertion in the existing food and other supply chains with minimal alliances that really work. What we're trying to do is have alliances that attempt to improve the governance and to transform supply chain systems. What has been in the center of microfinance? It has been the relation or the interface between the financial service provider and the clients. And the first revolution in microfinance was the transformation of the cost of transaction through embedding the finance in the people and in their strategies. And that was huge. And now what we've done since the 80s is to add bottom lines, right? To that first bottom line of financial stability. And making those bottom lines work is what we're really talking about today. We're talking about how do we really make the bottom line of putting women on the stage. How do we make that actually work? What should be at the center, right, of this? Inclusion and resilience really need a second microfinance revolution, right? That revolution, I could say it's really this way. Putting the relation between people and the ecosystem at the center of everything. The role of microfinance is not to lead. Its role is to put its resources and its immense service change out there to serve the people and the ecosystems. So it's a shift from individuals to ecosystems and to the people's relationship with ecosystems. Now, I'm actually old enough to have seen this happen in my country, this destruction of the rainforest. And, you know, if you've been to India or Nicaragua, you know they are two totally different worlds. But with what's been going on, by 1932, Nicaragua is going to look a lot more like India, right? And just one little thing here that you might see or not, it's not a mistake that you see more green in 2015 than there was in 2010. You can see that coming on. That's what the people themselves are doing without any help from the outside. That is, they are actually having to adapt to what's going on. And those are all cattle producing areas that are really adapting. And what FDL has done, and you know, I'm so glad to hear what CGAP wants to do, what Wendy talked about. All FDL programs are actually imitations of what people are already doing. And that's the goal, I think, of CGAP too, to be able to imitate what people are doing as they respond to climate change, right? Okay. Here's the problem. I don't believe in disaster scenarios, right? What Pahal and we are doing, we're trying to do beautiful things, even though we're drifting into more climate risk, right? Microfinance is the largest delivery system in the world, actually, with half a billion of clients. And by 1932, we're really talking about an immense increase if climate change doesn't hit us. So we are a player in what can go on with the climate. Now on this picture, you see the purple path, right? The purple path is what we would like to see. And it's something that microfinance can play a huge roles to keeping on that purple path and not going over 1.5 centigrades, because at 1.5 centigrades, that little red line, that's when the global south is in real trouble. We're in real trouble at 1.5. So what the world needs for its own survival is a redistribution of how green finance works. At this point, really, here's what we're doing. It shows you the shift I'm talking about, the revolution. Kartik and we're doing all individual entrepreneurship. We're harvesting water. We have new systems of irrigation. We're developing new systems of agroforestry. of silvopastoral activity, of how do we deal with seeds, how we deal with soil and water and conserving it. Now, what I am trying to say that we have to make the move from the individual, a view of an enterprise, into ecosystem transformation, in which we allow nature to actually have a role in what we do.
Hi, Pedro, apologies, but just one more minute.
Yeah, okay. So here's what we've learned, okay? Now, I just want to do a quick quiz on funding priorities. Lower risk loans, which funders? Everyone. Lower risk inclusive loans for micro enterprise, very few. When we talk about inclusive, we're actually talking about people who are not worthy of credit. We have a huge problem in the world of not being able to handle things because we're going back to the same people. We need to get to people. If we want environment, there's even fewer. Non-financial services, mainly only nonprofit cooperation, some bilateral, like the Norwegians are doing really great work in this. And resilient ecosystems are basically handled only by clientelistic public subsidy programs. And we need, they can be a problem in themselves. Okay. So anyway, we're talking about not just controlling our footprint, but actually putting agriculture in a place where it can capture carbon that reduces the footprints of Texaco and BP and Shell. Okay, here's one of my major arguments. You know, in Nicaragua, we all of us together, all the microfinance, have only about 20% of the enterprises where ecology is being destroyed. No matter what the success we do with that 20%, what's not happening with the other 80% is going to send that 20% bankrupt. We don't need a world of successful, resilient producers who go bankrupt, and that's what could happen. We need to take the focus off. So anyway, the major idea is, how do you do this? What we're working on is we let territories, ecosystems, multi-actors of all types of different people define what is the portfolio, what are the financial products, what are the bio awards, what are the non-financial services, and let them do their own monitoring and follow-up from an ecosystem viewpoint. Well, thank you so much. There's the take-homes. Thank you. Sorry, I went over.
Thanks, Pedro. That's great. There's a lot to unpack there, I think, across all of the presentations. So firstly, just to say thanks to all of the presenters. I have the privilege of being able to ask the first one or two questions here before I open it to the audience. So I wanted to start by noting that from the presentations, it's clear, obviously, that the scale of need is huge. A few of you spoke about the lowest income groups being those most vulnerable to climate impacts. Those are also the groups that can find it hardest to access finance. And that certainly fits with research that Opportunity has done on climate vulnerability and microfinance services in the last couple of years. So how do financial service providers navigate trade-offs between financial sustainability and building climate resilience in those who are most vulnerable? And perhaps that question should go first to Kartik or Pedro.
Pedro, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I was too shorthand in that. What FDL has is a program to incubate micro enterprises. That is, people who are not credit worthy. We have ways that people who are not credit worthy, that is women. Overall, we have to find a way to incubate a micro enterprise. And the truth is, you know, we found right at this point, you know, our portfolio at risk in FDL is better than all the commercial banks. And that's why financiers keep throwing money at us. But the problem is we've discovered that, say we're at 3% arrears on the whole program, these people who were not considered credit worthy are at 10% arrears. And so the thing is, the trade-off, Calum, is this: we're going to have to take losses. If we want to incorporate people, we want to include people then has to take a loss. That's it. And if you're good enough in the rest of the enterprise, you can incorporate more people. That's a short answer.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with what Pedro is saying. I think it's very important to create sustainable models which can kind of be maintained at a scale. Initially, I think there could be subsidized or grant-based funding, but I think eventually any impact will happen if there are models that gets created. And I think in the Indian context, there have been some, I mean, given the size of the country and given the kind of challenges that the country, the urgency of the need to address some of these issues, I think there have been attempts which are being made at creating business models around that. Just to kind of, give an example, the agroforestry policy of the government of 2014 really tries to kind of address this on a holistic basis, right from the challenges that in terms of transferring the technical know-how to the working capital and the long-term blended finance requirement. I think there has been a document which lays down a roadmap, and in a sense it is an opportunity for all the FSPs globally or in the context of India. I mean, of course, there are apex institutions and DFIs which do play a role in this, but the size of the market and the opportunities is among us. And unless you have, I mean, there are two basic things: unless you have an ecosystem partnership, and unless you have a long-term sustainable business model which clearly addresses the challenges of mitigation or adaptation on the climate, I think it'll not be possible to address this issue. So I think there have been some steps which have been taken, but a lot more needs to be done.
Yeah, that's great. So I mean, I guess you both touched on the need for committed partners there. And Pedro, you mentioned, we're going to have to take losses. I mean, that actually leads, I think, nicely into one of the questions we've had from the audience. From Daniel was, have you been able to identify funders or partners interested in strengthening FSP capacity in line with what is being discussed here? So I think Daniel was actually putting that question to Sophia, but either Sophia or Pedro, if you could respond to where do you find those partners or funders that are willing to take those losses?
You want to go first, Pedro, and then I'll follow up?
Okay. One of the things, way we identified over the history, our first clients, their children are now credit officials. So one of the ways in the microfinance industry is to have children of your clients gradually be the ones who really understand what's going on. And that's what we mean about being embedded. You have to embed is really the only way. You can't do it from the outside. To get inside the shell of that ecosystem to actually make it work. That's how we've identified. And of course, the problem we have is if we lose these people, because you build up a capacity, Wendy, over 20 years. And that's why I'm so glad of what CGAP is doing, right, with this. And what's going to happen, we need, part of the revolution is a whole new benchmarking of the industry, so that second and third tier people are saying, this is what we want. This is what we're benchmarking. We're benchmarking quality like you see in India from Kartik, right?
And Daniel, to your question, I think actually what we've found just within OI's AgFin program, so agriculture finance program, is that more and more tenders are looking for a financial component. So that expertise in building capacity for financial organizations. So it's, I think, or at least from my vantage point, there is more and more kind of conscientious focus on specifically building capacity of local networks, of local institutions, because I think after years of development finance, they're realizing that has more staying power for a lot of projects.
That's great. Thanks both. Another thing I picked up in the presentations was the success of climate solutions that were discussed certainly seems to depend on FSPs working in partnership with others, whether that's local government, agri-fintech, agri-service providers, green technical assistance. So how do FSPs and I guess if you can direct your comments to the FSPs in the audience who are not expert in this space, how do they find the right partnerships, and what makes for successful partnerships in climate resilience, if that's not too broad a question?
Can I take that?
Two.
Great.
Yeah, please.
Right. So Calum, I think it's, I mean, there is a micro approach and there's a macro approach, right? So from an FSP's perspective, I think it's, I mean, the micro approach really would be the subsection of the constituency that they serve, the vulnerable constituency that they serve, really creates the need to service these products. I mean, to service them through these products. So for example, I mean, we just mentioned about the challenge that we had in terms of the marginal farmers in Uttar Pradesh, and there was no way in which as an FSP on a standalone basis we would be able to contribute apart from lending, and therefore unless we find a reliable partner who has an understanding of the soil, the agriculture, the produce of that particular geography, it becomes almost impossible to service this customer effectively. So I think that's the micro approach which we have attempted. But I think, I mean, what Wendy and Sophia actually mentioned in the earlier presentations, a much more cohesive, integrated approach is the need of the hour. And I mean, there it could be, the ecosystem players, whether it is, of course, the FSPs, but the government, the donors, blended finance, the experts on the agriculture side, all of them, they need to come together and identify a whole set of geography or the entire set of problems, as Pedro repeatedly keeps mentioning, and I completely agree with that. But you cannot look at this solution in isolation, because if out of 180 people are not onboarded, then you're not solving the problem. So that's really the macro approach, and I think eventually in the long run, that is the approach that will have to be executed properly to kind of to make this work.
That's great. Thanks for that, Kartik. And maybe, I guess, the same question to you, Sophia. I mean, you're on the other side, I guess. The Ag Finance program is looking to partner with financial service providers, microfinance institutions. What are you looking for? What makes a successful partnership from your point of view? And what are the indicators of within an FSP of what's going to make that successful?
Yeah, so it's a good question. There are so many factors that can make or break a partnership in this space. But I think mindset from the actual financial institution. I mean, if we had 1,000 Kartiks and Pedros, that would be wonderful. I'm ready to kind of sacrifice profits in certain metrics. But again, really, if we're talking about scalability, we need to make sure these systems are profitable and make sure they're resilient as well. So I think there is something to be said about mindset, but really what it comes down to is capacity, and just willingness to push those boundaries of risk, boundaries of financial product development, boundaries of just new commercial interests. And what it really comes down to, and this is where our partnerships tend to gain their strength, is building and addressing those capacity issues and limitations at the financial service provider level. And then beyond kind of the financial service provider partnerships, looking at something I think both Kartik and Pedro have alluded to, is really local understanding, whether it's through the regenerative agriculture practices we want to motivate or incentivize, but really, really having local understanding what is already being taken up, maybe even without incentives, and how can we scale those things. So yeah, really, really understanding the local situation is critical.
I agree with Sophia wholeheartedly. The real problem is the capacity mesh between the allies, right? And this is particularly hard when we get up to a government ally, right? And we know that when the government of Kenya got behind the cattle insurance program, it expanded enormously. So, but that's one world. There are other worlds where the governments are against this. They are clientelistic. They're not worried. They're not interested in scaling up with anyone, right? So those are two worlds. And then see, within what Sophia is saying, the importance is fine tuning. How do you do it? And actually, I used to be totally Latin American. We want looser consortiums, and I'm really going over to the east, all right, to Grameen, to Brock, to Kartik, saying we need a really tight organization. It's a tight consortium, but we've got to get it together because we can't fine tune if we don't control. I think I'm understanding what you're saying, Kartik. You have to do that, and it's not the loose Latin American model. So I'm shifting in that actually right now, and that's why we're fine tuning. We're learning from India, and we're learning from Bangladesh.
Thanks, Pedro. We only have a couple of minutes left. We may be able to continue the conversation after the hour if there's interest and people want to stay. But in any case, I want to do two things. Firstly, I just want to highlight a post in the chat from Jürgen Hammer from SBTF. Thanks, Jürgen. This is actually a great resource that he's pointing to. This is the Universal Standards for Social Performance Management. They recently launched a seventh dimension to those universal standards that covers green microfinance, developing an environmental policy, managing climate risks, and developing products and services for climate resilience. And I think that's a great starting point for financial institutions that are interested in the topic. And then just as we come to close out the hour, I also wanted just to bring the CGAP view in again. So Wendy, just to come back to you, again on partnerships, what are the key types of partnerships that you see developing over the 4-year CGAP timeframe?
I think one of the things we are trying to pay close attention to is that we can't even just look at this with an aperture that just says we're only looking at climate. We need to look at the knock-on effects, the second and third order effects that are created that are oftentimes worse than the initial shock that people are presented with from a storm, from a drought, and other things. So that means that we need to look at a very diverse set of partnerships that includes people in the social sector, people in community-based organizations. It includes the financial institutions, it includes the healthcare industry, it includes private sector players, it includes government as well. Because if we take more of a client or even non-client, those who are not yet served by services perspective, and try to understand what their experience is in dealing with this and responding to it, and we kind of take their eyes as approaching this, I think it's going to force us to think about the things that are important to them. And it may not be the storm that just came. It may be the school fees that they still have to pay. It may be the loss of income that they are trying to deal with. It may be all of that. And that's going to change and force us to think about partnership in a lot of different ways. And so from CGAP, that's how we're thinking about partnership in terms of how we respond, in terms of how we grow in our understanding, and also who we bring to the table to talk about this as well. It's time for us to move away from the usual suspects in these conversations and open this up to a more diverse set of stakeholders than have traditionally been part of these conversations.
Thanks, Wendy. I think that's a great thought for us to take away from this, actually, is to think about the non-client perspective. And clearly that there's a need there to move away from business as usual and just focusing on our current clients. So I just want to wrap it up there. On behalf of the audience, I want to thank our speakers today. There were excellent presentations, a lot of ground covered, and some really critical points there. And also thank everyone for attending the webinar. And with that, I'll hand back to Abby to close us out with the next steps.
Thank you very much, Calum, and to the panelists and participants for such an interesting and engaging discussion. Before we close, I just wanted to go over what's next. We'd like to hear from all of you to get your feedback. When you close your Zoom window, a brief survey should appear, and we'd really appreciate if you can take a brief moment to respond. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning, the recording from this webinar and the presentations will be shared on the FinDev Gateway website. And once the recording is available, we'll send a follow-up email to everyone. And please feel free to share this with your network. And of course, for more financial inclusion resources, you can visit findevgateway.org. Once again, a big thank you to the panelists and to all of you who joined the webinar today for your questions and engagement on the topic. Thank you and have a good day or evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.